Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Wednesday night in Birth with the 2MK team. We are ready to watch people trying to hit each other a lot. Now, you'd think this is all fighting games, but no, I know I said trying. This game can definitely be about trying to hit each other, much more than it is about actually doing so. We are referring specifically to spacing and neutral today. Because as oppressive as this game is one of my favorites, and I think most of the team are fairly okay with it, even though the obvious thing is that getting good enough at it for it to be fun at all levels is a little rougher if you don't understand the spacing or defensive parts. Fortunately, if you do understand the spacing in this game, even getting beat up by high-level players or people who have really good combos isn't usually so bad, because it isn't always just that, oh, I couldn't stop them from hitting me and then I got beat up a lot. It's quite often, oh, I made a mistake in my movement and now, because of that, this higher level player has a ton of damage that they're going to output. And that's it. In order to beat the higher level player, you would have to either have equal amounts of damage or be able to beat them in the neutral. Sometimes even if you have the higher amount of damage, you're not able to beat them up, simply because you aren't as good at landing hits or confirming off the initial hits that you do land. That's going to be our focus for today, therefore, in possibly both of the streams we get. We are likely to have the NA stream at 7:30 Eastern.
A new sacrifice comes to you.
The EU stream is usually a loser stays on with some rotations out as need be, considering which things happen in terms of people having different experiences with lag or just wanting to fight someone at a higher level of specific type. I should probably use a better option with my opponent advancing this way. But it's probably not such a good idea to put Melty and this so close to each other and play. At least for us. I'm sure everyone else is fine, because not everyone plays both games. You can feel free to join this lounge and expect to have a good connection if you are anywhere on the rim of the Atlantic Ocean, the coast. But we are, of course, expecting to see more players from the EU side, or players who are very interested from the other.
命が惜しければ邪魔をするな。ファーストクローズディバイド出力をさらせ捉えられない。まだまだ遅い応募だ。先捉えられない。貫く。なかなかそれなりにくだらんバカだ。なかなかの夢だ。くだらんなかなか捉えられない。バカだ。何ら支障はない。お前の意志拒絶する。罪に落ち捉えられない。
With Zack, one of the main ways to move and change your spacing is to use specials, as Zack's walk speed is quite slow. With shorter normals as well, and not as many as you'd expect to advance without actually risking the run. It's easier to just use the specials and certain normals to advance yourself. Moving through the air is about half what you need to do, but the main thing you're caring about is the fact that he can forward air dash forward assault out of aerial backdash. Just another thing added to a character to make them more mobile in a specific way, specifically going into the air. Emotions become even more green. In our Melty Blood content yesterday, we were mostly talking about options other than pressure on opponent knockdowns. If you know a matchup really well, you don't have to go for pressure as much because you can simply use the optimal spacing for your character that is the worst spacing for your opponent's character. This is going to come up more in the future because even though we are definitely loving this game and still very interested in it, it is probably dropping off somewhat in popularity, and we'll have to see whether or not it gets a lot of high spaces in the upcoming tournaments and so on. Now that we are having tournaments again, basically. But new games tend to take the space, and what you're really looking for is whether or not people found it interesting enough, and the rate of relatively new entrants. What we are expecting to see, though not in any tournaments soon due to the release date, is more stuff from the upcoming DNF Duel. And if you haven't been able to play that game, a lot of the base principles of this one, particularly if you are able to input lots from our website for your training mode, can end up being very similar because the things you are trying to focus on are very much the same. probably get a game volume check, since this is actually kind of louder than I expected on my end, but that does not mean that it is off of balance on the other. I can't think of a way that it would have reset my sound setting still. So one of the constraints as a character I mentioned on previous streams is that Seth isn't really able to get away from her very long. And she defends the airspace well enough that you don't get a lot out of trying that. But there is a matchup way to deal with this. Part of the reason Seth ends up at disadvantage in these situations is because Mika's range is very slightly better, so she can afford to block earlier into her own strengths. Pushback is also better. But just as demonstrated with Koma yesterday, there is a way to deal with this. But it is at least not one that is innately disadvantaged to her. Last stream rather, we used Seth's orb to resolve the problem. This time around, it's probably easier to use the dashing C, as while she does have defenses against this, it prevents you from having to have the same level of accuracy on everything you do. If you can execute it quickly enough, it does have a really long hitbox situation, and most of the buttons she will hit won't matter. If she goes to block at the correct moment, Seth will basically be in a mix-up. You won't necessarily know which side he's on, and it will make it harder to deal with. On the other hand, against Aurier, because the way she defends the air is a bit more directed and she doesn't have as many options, nor do her hitboxes last as long, you can spend a lot more time doing complicated air movements. Her own air movements tend to be very heavy on committing, so making her miss or just being misleading as a generality changes a lot of things. Whereas dashing into a slash only matters if your opponent was basically thinking they were coming toward you. Therefore you end up using it more as a pressure tool. From the Aurier side, the easiest answer is to get out of the way in any form you can, usually dashing forward because Seth is just that type of character. Because there's never enough reason to assume that your opponent will actually be on the ground. From Seth's side, you have to deal with a character who can backdash far enough that basically nothing will reach, and any attempt will actually leave you open. Even though I'm talking a little less, it seems that mostly whatever it was that was bothering me is finally clearing up. So I definitely can talk more. And that means that tonight's stream will probably have a lot more detail in it. I mean, it is one of those games where if you learn a matchup on one character, it's relatively easy to understand what the basics of that matchup are with other characters. This is not to say that you will use the same responses, or even what the opponent spends their time doing will become important, but simply that they are clear enough in terms of what they can do as characters that you don't generally have to spend so much time thinking about, is this possible? Will something crazy happen if I try it here? And the few that you do have problems with, you can usually learn somewhat intuitively. So, similarly, you can push on that, and the only thing that changes is what is available to the opponent when they achieve Vorpal state, denoted by the bar on the bottom. Vorpal is fairly intuitive to understand in two ways, and one complex way that is not intuitive if you're not familiar with this game basically at all. If you are moving forward, you are gaining Vorpal gauge. Well, GRD gauge. If you are moving backwards, you're usually losing it. If you take damage, you lose it. If you do damage, you gain it. All of these things are pretty obvious. It works almost like everything else. The complex part is usually that if you use your force function, it may lower your gauge. And this happens to differing amounts for different characters. Once you have that state, you can use it to confirm into a lot of things, and you can use a specific cancel style to change the meter you had from one into the meter you have for the other. But what is less intuitive to many people is that correctly guarding also raises the gauge. So it isn't that playing defensively causes you to lose gauge, it's that retreating causes you to lose it. So if you have a very mobile style that involves lowering your opponent into things, and they have a powerful Vorpal state that will somehow change the matchup, you do have to be more careful about when you are being not even necessarily defensive, when you are moving out of position in the expectation that you might be able to get a whiff punch. An advancing opponent who does not attack is probably going to do better than they normally can. because to attack might be to be blocked and therefore give you gauge, but to simply keep on taking the forward movement and therefore not often means that they end up getting the advantage.
ファーストクローズディバイド
捉え避けろ耐えきれるか捉えられない何ら支障そこだかける大爆くだらかけるもらったもらった先見切れるか捉えられまいそこだそれなり次は切だ捉えられまい貫く無形理系かける先捉えられまい次は宙を前口どけをさらせこの程度で終わりか
ウィンドセットセカンドクローズディバイド
次は次はない方に
ウィンを止めるとミカサードクローズディバイド
お前の意志拒絶そこで
カウンター
かける
セクシー
かける宙を前後期捉えられまい後期捉えられまい貫くかける後期前いって知れ昇降のベンジェンス後期それなき切な前いって知れ後期次はないと思え破れるだと
ウィナーミカ
Well, we're already halfway through.
命が惜しければ邪魔をするな
ファーストクローズディバイド行きなさい
見切れるか上だ遅いもらった来るか防いだ早期捉えられまい避けろ見切れるか
ディバインスラッ
もらった捉え捉えられまいこっちだ捉えられまい見切れるか何らし昇降のベントに器物はこういうことだ拍子に
セカンドクローズディバイド
そこでもらったそこで屈辱を見切れるそこで虚栄だ貫く工事大爆かけるおい何らし前血でかける天空のペネルトにそれ一戦 屈辱をさ屈辱を
勝敗は決しました。ウィナー
まぐれ当たり
サードクローズディバイド
遅いかける見えるかそうかなかなかの無駄だかけ捉えられまい縛るかける耐えきれる捉えられまいなかなかかける勝つと言い出さず避ける屈辱をさらせて前に知力を抑え偶然宙を前こう来た先警備次は何捉えられまいかける油断したなかなかの無邪魔だそこでこうすらんとダメか破れるだと
ウィナー堀井
私利を求めることに躊躇なく力を振るう浅ましき義胆のものよ。リヒトクライスの執行
I wonder if it shows up that way on everyone else's screen that they actually have to change their character every time. I don't think so.
一体なぜあなたがここに？
ファーストクローズディバイド
エヴァ行きます。油断しました。行きます。よいしょ。行きなさい。行きます。行きなさい。うまい。行きます。行きます。やります。大正解。行きなさい。
Despite the fact that my voice is better, I'm probably still somewhat resting. Similar to Street Fighter streams where we don't have people outside the team where analysis is new or different. So you can generally assume the stream is going to be quieter, unless someone else joins it. Last time we got someone toward the latter end though, so that's possible.
Second close, divide. Third close, divide.
But we did just see demonstrated the other aspect of this. If you use your shield/guard mechanic correctly, it will also raise your gauge, so it's even better in terms of how well you are defending. The interaction you get when one person is defending without that mostly depends on how many advancing moves the other player uses. There are other things related to specifically what type of move they're using as well.
A new sacrifice comes to you.
命が惜しければ邪魔をするな。
あなたを救済します。
ファーストクローズ、ディバイド。
ディバインス
捉えられまい。
遅い。行きます。父は
闇にのこうき。
行きます。エバーカウン
縛る。
ここから
それな見え見え捉えられまい。
Against this character, it's not necessarily useful to speed up or build up orbs in this way. She's very good at hitting them, and you have to go into the air to launch them, which slows down your own offense in other ways as well. You can use it to help you make sure that you get out of situations easier, but it's not necessarily going to be helpful.
勝敗を決しました。
ウィン、オリエ、セカンドクローズ、ディバイド。
And because Steph has one of those force functions that does eat up a lot of GRD gauge, you might not want to use it.
サードクローズ、ディバイド。
仕留め罪に落ち屈辱をかけ捉えられまい。虚勢利権屈辱何がし次はないと思う。もらった演劇もらったそこだそこだ夜は消えろ。そして二度と俺の前にその姿を現すな。命が惜しければ邪魔をするな。
ファーストクローズ、ディバイド。
後期見切れるか。捉えられまい。日傘かける。遅い。前に散れる。捉えられまい。こけ。捉えられまい。後期後期捉えられない。
I held them back.
捉えられない。思い立つきる。引く。遅い。遅い。遅い。もらった。 の程度で終わりか。
ウィンセットセカンドクローズディバイド
遅い屈辱おい遅い天空のペネトラこうだ捉えられない貫く討伐
カウント
くだらないそこで仕留め次に落ち後期捉えられまい貫く討伐もらったそれなくだらんかける前に散れ背負ったものの差だ。
ウィンセット
お前も俺もさして変わりはしない。同じ路傍の石さ。次にそうして横たわり捨てられるのは俺かもしれないのだから。
一体なぜあなたがここに？
ファーストクローズディバイド
向こうか下軸大事に
セカンドクローズディバイド
One of the things that ends up being extremely meaningful, particularly in the sort of matches you're seeing here, is knowing which way to recover in the air when you hit your air recover button. Because of the speed of strikes and advancing movement in the game, it becomes more important to get this right.
A new sacrifice comes to you.
You absolutely don't want to be dodging into the space your opponent is suited for attacking, or even just any space that they might be thinking you are going into, unless you have some plan. In general, what you can do once you've used your air recovery is somewhat limited.
命が惜しければ邪魔をするな。
あなたを救済します。
ファーストクローズ
And you have to be really careful about it as a result. This is particularly dangerous against characters like Seth and Carmine, where not only do they have the ability to attack nearly anywhere, they're able to put out things that are functionally traps that allow them to attack even when they are not physically in that space. For example, if you're fighting Seth, you end up learning a lot of stuff about when exactly an orb's height is going to result in you being able to dodge out or not. If the orb is too high, it's often easy to get away from certain things, unless it's over your head. This is particularly important for characters like Orie who have the range advantage against Seth normals, as the optional thing for Seth to do is to go into the air and then toss out the orb like that. Not necessarily because the orb is going to lead to damage, but simply because it's easier to do that than most other things, while still making sure that you don't necessarily get hit by the character. As you can see, just going raw straight offense in the space that you could normally use it leads you to the position of being at Orie's mercy if you miss. She has quick enough buttons in neutral that they recover, especially if you force them to whiff. They recover in ways that allow her to use other pursuit moves. Even against Seth, who will go into the air, you have to consider whether or not you will be coming back down in a way that matters. For Mika, whose attack space covers a relatively wide arc as she moves, sometimes it's a straight, but there's at least some lines. Sometimes the line is curved and sometimes it isn't. Seth uses it in a different way. When faced with Mika that is close enough to start her pressure strings, you will have to defend your way out of them. But because she has the command grab, and you would have to therefore be able to actually react in time, and the ends of her strings don't generally put her in places where Seth can beat her up, the reason why you've seen me mention using the orb before is that you can set it into a place to fire at the point where Mika wants to counterattack you and interrupt that pressure string. That's why I was saying on the previous stream, because that's like a quarter of my health there from basically messing up placement
次はない闇に乗っかけ捉えられない貫く捉えられないなかなかお前の意志拒絶もらったそこだ何らこう宙を前へさか遅い遅い後期巻いて散れこ遅い電通のペネタン遅い後期作節捉えられない捉えられない夜はまだ終わらない言ったはずだ止まって見えると冗談だとでも思っていたようだな
This is often true in games that, even though it seems somewhat counterintuitive, straightforward characters often force you to play more straightforwardly. Grapplers force you to spend more time focused on your throws, and pressure characters are often weak to pressure. So if you don't know how to take on a matchup, look at what your opponent does. Not necessarily the spaces that they do it or trying to get to those same spaces yourself, but figure out what it is that they are trying to do and see whether or not you can use your own character in a way more similar to that. That will give you a quicker way of determining whether or not the thing that they are doing is something they're actually better than your character at doing entirely, or if they're just trying to prevent you from doing something else that your character is good at, which is quite often the case. For example, you will notice that often in this matchup, Armika doesn't try to get closer to Orie, instead using the Rocket Blast from her palm and certain specific relatively quickly advancing moves or charged moves in the air to get advantages, since just going in closer to Orie doesn't often lead to anything great, but she does actually have some space where she can keep up in terms of, I am going to play footsies with you, I'm going to equal you in range in some way. And from the opposite side, while Orie could focus entirely on just making sure that she hits the right buttons, the fact that Mika will then have to defend against these buttons means that there is a chance to get some grappling in, even though she does not herself have any command grab or quick grapple she can do from far. The opponent must look out for other moves she could do, and therefore opens up a higher chance of her landing a throw. These things do have preconditions though. You have to generally convince your opponent that you are willing to do the main thing that they're thinking about, so that the other one becomes more sensible. You can't just go, oh well, Mika's a throw character, so I'm going to throw her. But it really doesn't matter, because some opponents will in fact fall completely to that. They're simply not expecting that that's going to be the thing, because they're used to fighting opponents who do something to try to get away from their main strategy, instead of putting themselves at risk of the main strategy.
A new sacrifice comes to you.
There are of course times where this is not possible, but at least starting your analysis from that side will give you a place to check from. This is one of those matches where it is not possible particularly for either character. Seth has far more mobility than Orie in terms of being deceptive, and overall better pressure strengths because he advances on so many moves. Similarly, Seth basically can't touch Orie mid-screen in the way that you'd be looking for. Her range is so long that even using specials to do this just results in you getting hit out of them before anything can happen. And as noted before, the Bat Dash is sufficient to escape nearly everything Seth wants to do.
勝敗は決します。
ウィナーオリエンセカンドクローズディバイド
強烈そこで
やります。
捉えられまいいいがさオーバーもらった捉えられまいいいがさかける
まだまだ。
演劇だもらった見切れるかバカだ
油断します。行きます。
何ら支障はない
あなたが降りてきます。
それなりに昇降のベンデンス罪に落ち
やりますね。下セクレットアロー。
くださせるか捉えられまい
もさエヴァ
屈辱をさ屈辱をさ捉えくらまりだ
You can do things like that though. Put yourself in positions where, even after Oria's lighter pushback, you will in fact reach. But the player is incentivized to try it anyway because that's what they always do. It's part of the required reactions in the match, and therefore by making it so that sometimes those reactions fail, you can stress them out more.
Seo 気に病むことなどない。この対なる刃から逃れる術などないのだから。
I would assume that this is the last match, but because it technically is, the game tends to run so long, even if I'm being extremely aggressive, it is possible that if we're both playing at our best, that will actually make it last even longer. But we'll see what happens about halfway through.
ファーストクローズディバイド
闇に飲まれよ避けろ捉えられまい貫く上捉えもらった捉えられまい後期来いかける避けてもらった避けるなかなかの闇に飲まれよくだらしとめついに落ちそこで捕らえられまい身が上大幕耐えきれるくだら毎日この程度
I should check whether or not she's throw invincible because she is airborne for a certain specific moment of her actual command grab.
クイーンは
小石につま
ミカサードクローズディバイド
電撃もらったそうかせっ捉えられまい逃がす王道だもらった電通のペネトレイトかける前一連捉え捉えられまい逃がすかける前一連宙を前背負ったものの差だ
It was kinda close, but we're still going into the last on-stream match of the night.
気に病むことなどない
It has been a busy week for us, both in terms of expectations and content, and plans for future content. For some of us, it's a big burst of practice, even for games that they don't intend to play at Combo Breaker. Or rather, not enter tournaments for. After all, why would they practice and then not get in as much casuals as possible? But a lot of it has more to do with the way you think about the game. And extra content is always helpful for long plane or train trips. If you're already somewhat hyped for the upcoming tournament, having streams to watch of any type, reminding you both of your own character strengths and tactics you're likely to experience, especially against tournament level players or even people who, you know, consider at least worth their time to come out to a tournament. At the end of the day, after all, if you're playing casuals, there's a decent chance that the strongest player will remain on the setup for relatively long, even if they're like the type to offset and do other things. While the players who are learning are going to be learning by fighting that strong player a lot of the time. So, if you're going to be expecting to play casuals at the popular times at a tournament, especially one as large as Combo Breaker, you should be prepared to fight some fairly high-level players. People who, even if they're not like the absolute pros, probably the people who are practicing extra in the hopes of beating those pros. If you are not at that level yet, and therefore, for example, didn't enter the tournament, it's still a decent chance that your opponent did, simply because they're the one who stay on the setup long enough. But of course, not always. The fighting game community is a community though, and understanding how to help someone even stand up to your character can often be a good bonding point. Speaking of bonding points, you can check out our Twitter 2_MK_FGC to find out when we're streaming and what we're streaming. We should be having our NA Lounge, and tomorrow our Feeling Thursday King of Fighters content. There's probably nothing on Friday once again. You can find all our bots at 2-mk.org. But this lounge is probably closing up. This has been Rillian, 142MK. Good luck with your training. Good night, everyone.